What if I told you that one of the most important wars in Indian history was not important because of who lost it, but because of what it did to the man who won? What if the most powerful emperor in ancient India looked at his greatest military victory and saw not glory, but horror? And what if one battlefield became the reason Buddhism spread across Asia? This is the mystery of Ashoka, a king who conquered a kingdom, a warrior who won a war, an emperor who stood at the peak of power. And then, at the very moment when most rulers would celebrate, something inside him changed. He did not become more ambitious. He did not become more brutal. He did not launch endless new wars. Instead, he began to speak about compassion. He began to carve moral messages into stone. He began to support Buddhism. And he became one of the most unusual rulers in world history. So the question is not simply, who was Ashoka? The real question is, what did Ashoka see after the Kalinga War that changed him forever? To understand the mystery, we have to go back to ancient India, more than 2,000 years ago. Before Ashoka became a symbol of peace, he belonged to one of the most powerful imperial families in Indian history, the Mauryan dynasty. This was not a small kingdom. This was not a loose group of villages. This was an empire, a vast political machine that connected huge parts of the Indian subcontinent. Its capital was Pataliputra, one of the great cities of ancient India. From there, kings sent officials, armies, orders, and tax collectors across distant regions. The empire had roads, it had military power, it had provincial governments, it had the ability to move people, money, and command across enormous distances, and Ashoka inherited this world. He did not grow up as a quiet monk. He did not begin as a gentle philosopher. He was born into empire, and empire has its own logic. Expand, control, secure the borders, defeat rivals, unite territory, make the map complete. That was the world Ashoka stepped into. The Mauryan Empire had already been built before Ashoka. His grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, had founded the dynasty. Chandragupta rose in a time when northern India was changing dramatically. Alexander the Great had reached the northwest of the Indian world. Greek power had shaken older political structures, and in this age of uncertainty, Chandragupta built something new, a huge Indian empire. After him came Bindusara, Ashoka's father. By the time Ashoka came to power, the empire was already one of the greatest political forces in South Asia. But there was a problem, a missing piece. On the eastern coast of India, there was a region that still stood outside Mauryan control, Kalinga. And this is where the mystery begins. Because to Ashoka, Kalinga was not just another land. It was the key to completing imperial power. Kalinga was located near the eastern coast, in a region connected with modern Odisha and nearby areas. It had access to the sea. It had strategic value. It had access to the sea. It had strategic value. Think about it from the emperor's point of view. If Kalinga stayed independent, it was a gap in the imperial map. A region that could resist Mauryan authority. A place that could control coastal routes. A symbol that not everyone had submitted. For most ancient rulers, this was enough reason for war, and Ashoka was not yet remembered as the emperor of compassion. He was an emperor of power, so he did what powerful emperors often do. He marched on Kalinga. Now pause here, because if this were a normal ancient history story, we already know what would happen next. The emperor attacks, the enemy resists, the empire wins, the king celebrates, the court praises him, the poets call him mighty. The inscriptions boast about his greatness. That is the usual story of conquest. But Ashoka's story takes a strange turn. Because after Kalinga, the most important thing was not the victory. It was the silence after the victory. It was what Ashoka saw when the battle was over. The Kalinga War was devastating. Ashoka's own inscriptions later described the suffering caused by the conquest. People were killed, people were taken away, families were separated, communities were shattered. And then the emperor looked at the result. He had won. Kalinga had fallen. The empire had expanded. The map looked complete. But something was wrong. The victory did not feel like victory. This is the central puzzle of Ashoka's life. Why would a king regret winning? Why would a conqueror publicly remember his own conquest as a tragedy? Why would a man at the height of power begin to question the meaning of power itself? Most kings are changed by defeat. Most kings are changed by defeat. They lose a war and they become cautious. They lose a kingdom and they learn humility. They lose power and they understand weakness. But Ashoka was different. Ashoka was changed by victory. That is what makes him so fascinating. He did not look at Kalinga and say, "I need more wars." He looked at Kalinga and seemed to ask, "What have I done?" And here, Ashoka did something almost unbelievable for an ancient emperor. He carved his remorse into stone. In his famous rock edicts, especially the 13th major rock edict, Ashoka spoke about the conquest of Kalinga and the suffering it caused. This is not normal royal propaganda. Ancient kings usually used inscriptions to show strength. They said they crushed enemies. They said they were chosen by gods. They did not usually say, "My victory caused pain," but Ashoka did. He acknowledged the suffering of those who were killed, displaced, and separated from the people they loved. He recognized that conquest hurt not only soldiers, but also ordinary people, parents, children, teachers, religious communities, families, people who had never asked to become part of an emperor's dream. This is the first key to the mystery. Ashoka's transformation was caused by seeing the human cost of his own strength. But then another question appears. If Ashoka regretted Kalinga, what did he do next? Did he give up the throne? Did he dissolve the empire? Did he disappear into a monastery? No. And this is where the story becomes more complex. Ashoka remained emperor. He still governed. But he began to redefine what kingship meant. He did not stop being powerful. Instead, he tried to give power a moral direction. The word at the center of this transformation was Dhamma. Dhamma can mean moral law, right conduct, ethical duty, a universal order that should guide human behavior. For Ashoka, Dhamma became the answer. If conquest by the sword creates suffering, then what kind of conquest should a ruler seek? Ashoka's answer was, conquest by Dhamma, not by fear, not by slaughter. This is why Ashoka becomes one of the most important rulers in the history of India. He made his transformation public. He carved it across the landscape. Ashoka's edicts were a new kind of royal voice. They spoke not only to nobles, but to ordinary people. They were instructions about how to live. Respect your parents, honor elders, treat servants with kindness, show restraint in speech, respect different religious communities, avoid needless cruelty. This was not the usual voice of empire. It was the voice of a ruler who wanted his people to understand that morality was for everyone, even kings. India contained many traditions. Brahmanical religious life continued. Jain communities existed. Local gods and regional practices continued. Different people worshipped and lived in different ways. Ashoka's Dhamma tried to speak across those differences. But Ashoka's Dhamma was not only a narrow sectarian message. He did not force everyone to become Buddhist. His empire was too diverse for that. He was not just spreading a religion. He was trying to create a moral language for empire, a way for many different people to live under one rule without destroying one another. Under his influence, Buddhism moved beyond its earlier base. It spread to Sri Lanka, China, and Southeast Asia. One battlefield helped shape the religious history of a continent. One of the most famous traditions connected with Ashoka's Buddhist legacy is the mission to Sri Lanka. Later Buddhist memory tells of Ashoka's son Mahinda traveling to Sri Lanka as a monk. It also remembers his daughter Sanghamitta and the sacred Bodhi tree tradition. But Ashoka gave Buddhism a major historical push. Under and after his influence, Buddhism moved beyond its earlier base. It eventually spread to Sri Lanka, Central Asia, China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and Tibet. The real story is that Ashoka began to ask what kind of ruler he should be. He did not destroy the empire. He tried to give the empire a conscience. Ashoka's edicts also reveal another part of the mystery. He wanted his officials to care about different communities. He spoke about practical welfare, planting trees, digging wells, providing medical care for humans and animals. A ruler had a duty to care. This is why Ashoka feels so modern. He was asking, what is government for? Should it also protect welfare and reduce suffering? Ashoka's idea of tolerance was also political wisdom. An empire cannot survive by force alone. For that, a ruler needs a shared moral language. Dhamma became that order. He discovered that territory is not the same as ruling well. He discovered that victory can create wounds that no triumph can erase, and he tried to respond by changing the purpose of his reign. There is something deeply dramatic about Ashoka's silence after Kalinga. We do not have a diary where Ashoka tells us every private thought, but his inscriptions give us enough to see the shape of the transformation. After his death, Mauryan power weakened. Eventually, the empire declined, but if we judge him only by survival, we miss the point. His empire disappeared. His message did not. But Ashoka's empire disappeared. His message did not. Modern India chose the Ashoka chakra as its symbol. Ashoka became a bridge between ancient and modern India, between power and conscience. So what did Ashoka see? He saw that victory can be defeat. He saw that power can make suffering look small. But Ashoka saw the ground. And after that, he could not look at kingship the same way. This is why he is Ashoka the Great, a conqueror who questioned conquest, a man whose transformation became part of the moral memory of Asia. The Kalinga War changed him, and he changed history. Empire, war, suffering, Dharma. Can power develop a conscience? For Ashoka, the answer began in Kalinga, a place he conquered, a place that conquered him. This is the story of Ashoka, the ruler who turned toward Dhamma, the man who reminds us that the most important battle is the one fought inside the human heart. This is the story of India,